Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise God, my help and my God. As a younger person, I was most aware of depression and of grief. These weren't topics of discussion, but they were there. I did feel like there were these two parts of me, right? The public side, or the side I was in school or in church or in my extracurricular activities, this kind of happy side. And it was hard for me to tell if I was performing happy or if I really was happy. Because there are times when I really was happy. And so that part was real to me, but then it felt very separate and apart from this other part of myself that did feel sad and felt lonely. I would say, oh, well, I'm sad because my grandmother passed away, or I feel sad because of this rift in my family, or I feel sad because I've moved and gone to college and it's a new environment and I'm still adjusting, right? I think I would attribute them to events, but also within myself, I thought, I'm always sad. If you dig deep, there'll be this river of sadness that flows underneath everything. But I didn't have a way of naming that very well or talking about that. But I didn't call it depression, really. Even though I think there was a time when I was in college, before I was diagnosed, I saw those depression checklists and I was like, oops, check, 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 right? And then I would see all the symptoms of depression and say, oh, wow, that's me. I think I should probably get some help for this. I think the biggest barriers to ongoing care, getting a diagnosis, were, for me, the perception that therapy was a white person's thing. Like, this is not something Black people do or Black people did. This wasn't something that was talked about like in my church, it wasn't talked about in my family, and it wasn't talked about amongst my Black friends or the circles I was in. We didn't have conversations about mental health. We didn't use words like depression or let alone any other kind of diagnosis. So I don't think it occurred to me even, like, oh, you should get a diagnosis, right? Even when I thought about therapy, I was like, I just need some help. I didn't think, oh, I need some long-term help, right? There were times I had smaller bursts of professional help before I was 18. But when I finished college, I was like, there is something better out there for me. I think I really have some things I need to work through. Wherever I go next, I think I need a therapist. When I got to graduate school, that was something I really cared about and looked for. You know, I paid attention to like the student health services and finding a therapist.
There are so many layers in terms of the barriers that can keep one from seeking mental health aid. Culture has a great influence in how we live our lives, our values, our beliefs. There are some aspects of culture that might say that this is not what we do, right? This is not part of our culture. We don't go talk to a mental health professional. We deal with our problems at home. They stay within the house. We can work it out ourselves. It's really up to us who do know the value of getting help with whatever little problems may come up in talking to someone. It's up to us to be able to then bring that information to our families, to our friends, and to help educate them.
It was the end of my first year of grad school when I became a survivor of sexual assault. It was an incredibly traumatic experience, as it is for anyone, right, who survives sexual assault. I did have a therapist and said, oh, you know, I think that you could really benefit from going to a survivors group. I found a local rape crisis and sexual assault center. For me, that was a real beginning to my healing. It was in this season and in the healing from sexual assault that I learned how to grow in faith. And I learned how to kind of wrangle my mental health and my faith together. I also realized I'd had a spiritual crisis. I looked up and I had stopped praying. I had stopped talking to God. I had stopped going to church. I've been talking about and preaching about and praying about this God that intervenes and that parts the Red Sea and that looks out for God's children. Where were you, God? Why were you not intervening? Why were you not parting the Red Sea? Why were you not stopping this from happening to me? I didn't know it was okay to scream at God. That was how I began to pray again. I began to look for a faith and a theology and a way of being faithful that still was true to my experience. It was an experience of great suffering. And because I began working with other survivors of sexual assault, it wasn't just my suffering. These are people I now know and care about. We're all in deep pain. I was like, where's our God? I got this response like right here. I wasn't rescuing you or saving you, but I was right here, holding you, crying when you cried, laughing whenever you laughed, being closer than your very breath. That was like, oh, nobody talks about that. Let's tell people this. I think what had happened in my healing process from sexual assault was I had put together, without really even being conscious of it, right, this life that wove together the things I needed to be okay. I was involved in West African dance, which was both spiritual and very physical for me. I had a community of friends. I had a faith community. I don't know that I would have ever named at that time, like, these are things I need to be okay.
One of the things that I've tried to do is help people recognize and utilize cultural and spiritual and religious resources that are already part of the community. Lament is a crucial resource as it relates to the healing of trauma. For the African American community, the spirituals played that resource historically. The blues provided that resource historically. Hip hop at its best, you've got some significant prophetic voices in that space. Prayer is a significant spiritual resource. Ritual and liturgy are two underutilized resources that can have therapeutic value. Trying to see what resources are already there that can provide healing and then help those communities utilize them with a level of intentionality, or trying to kind of use some building blocks, if you will, that are already there and build some type of a resource. So, so it's contextualized.
I was very excited about starting a PhD because I was like, I have big questions now. But it was hard. It was incredibly isolating for me in ways I didn't anticipate. Oh, I can find a church. Yeah, sure. I can find, dance classes. But I didn't really factor that in with the life shift that was occurring. Like, I had gone from being a full-time minister and activist to being a person who reads a lot of philosophy every week. This is a big shift, and it's hard because even if I was willingly giving that up, it was a loss. And I had found so much purpose in that. And so I was doing this, and I didn't have that safety net. I didn't have family or community to catch me the way I had, where I had previously been. So when I began to fall, I was free falling. In my first year, I got sick. I had bronchitis, and it was misdiagnosed as the flu. Because I was misdiagnosed, the medicine I was given ended up being something that I was allergic to and that made me sick. And then all the measures they took to make it better made me sicker. I couldn't sleep, I was in pain, just all these things were wrong. And somewhere in all of that, depression just hit. I was just crying all the time. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, and I could tell I was getting closer to suicidal ideation. My coworker had pointed me toward a pastoral care center who very quickly, like within 10 minutes, were like, oh, you need something much more than what we can do. And eventually I got this, pretty great psychiatrist who said, well, let's talk about this over time. These are not these little isolated incidents of sadness. But when you're talking about this, it sounds like this is something you've lived with for a really long time. And I was like, oh. yeah, I guess so. She said, oh, it looks like it's a severe and recurrent major depression. And I was like, oh, there's a name for this. And so now I know what I'm working with. What was I going to have to do and going to have to change to be well?
Christians can think about self-care as an opportunity to tend to the bodies and the minds and the spirits that God has given us. Instead of seeing self-care as something that is selfish or takes away from the work that God is doing in the world, we can think of it as an extension of how God wants to bring love into creation. So thinking about self-care as a way to actually be more loving in the world is just an extension of offering to ourselves the love that we offer to so many other people. Self-care can be a way that we prevent mental health issues. It can be a part of tending to ourselves to make sure that we have balance, that we are cared for, that we are loved, that we are getting all of the things that we need to meet the demands of life, employment, relationships, and just this being human. But self-care can also be one of the things that we notice is missing when there are mental health issues, particularly acute ones. Some people actually need to learn how to care for themselves in very basic ways, realizing that their bodies deserve care, that their hygiene deserves care, that they're allowed to take breaks from work instead of working all of the time. So we can see self-care as a really important ingredient in recovery from mental health issues, but also the prevention of them.
God has called us to flourish in our health, in our relationships, in our emotions, and we can't really do that without taking care of ourselves. When I'm working too much and not taking enough time, it's because I'm trying to fill something within me, as opposed to giving that up and actually trusting that, yes, Christ can provide. It's not all up to me.
I was reading these books and looking for memoirs by people who live with depressive conditions. And I would read about them and I was like, well, I get the depression, but there's not this other part, this part that has made it always so hard for therapists to understand or believe me, because I seem to be this highly functional person. And the way depression was measured was by the inability to do things. That's not my experience. I can still do things, but I'm sad. I found this description of bipolar 2, and I was like, that's me. I called my psychiatrist and I'm like, hey, I was reading this thing and it sounds like me. And of course she's like, I can't diagnose you over the phone. Like, there are rules about these things. But who also really affirmed, like, I treated you as if this was your diagnosis. I haven't seen you long enough to know it, but this was really what I thought. I had to really respect and really understand both bipolar within me and what it would take to be well. Whether it's exercising at home, going to the gym, I took up cycling. Really, it's a spiritual discipline as much as it is self-care for me. Gratitude, coming to the end of every day and being like, there are at least 3 things that I can find to be grateful for. And that's become a really big part of self-care and spiritual discipline for me. Can't eat junk food all the time. Like, I have to eat well. Friendship, really good friends who know me well and who know from the sound of my hello if I'm okay or not. And faith community has continued to be big for me. It is probably literally what helps me be grounded, what makes me feel like I am connected to the earth, connected to God, and connected to other people. I do believe probably more than anything else that God is with us, that God is Emmanuel, that there is nothing that we can do to shake God. God knows us from the inside out. Getting to that place is a huge part, I think, of being well, because that's what catches me. I guess that's my biggest safety net, is always feeling very sure that God's got me and God understands me. When there's something that is so inexplicable and wordless about the experience.
Sometimes, particularly Christians, have a tendency to think that looking after yourself is selfish or narcissistic or something that you shouldn't really do. When Jesus talks about the sum of the law and the prophets, he says, love God, love neighbor, love yourself. And so Jesus says, love yourself. So self-care is being faithful to Jesus' command to love yourself, which means that, dealing with issues, being open, being able to talk to people, being honest, being anxious when you feel anxious, being sad when you feel sad. And I think that sense of honesty is central to people's mental health anyway. So self-care is not being ashamed to look after yourself.
The biggest frustration I have is when I can't do things I want to be able to do. What I want to do, what I think I should be able to do, just simply does not align with my capacity. I've had to say, that's okay. Change the plan. It will be all right. It's something I had to learn really career-wise even, that you think you can do something, and when you're in a depressive mode, you can't do it. You just can't deliver on it. Not because you don't want to, but you don't have the capacity. And learning to say, I'm sorry, I can't. I would like to. This is something I can't do. How can I make it up to you? How can I refer someone else to you? And that's hard, right? Because it's this like uber accountability, both to oneself and to other people, that requires a kind of honesty that I don't think we're used to as a society. We're used to like, just do your best, fake it, whatever. Like, no, you can't. And for me, that was part of what I learned about taking the condition seriously and also being kind enough to not push myself to do things I really can't do.
I define self-care as accepting limitations. As a human, I am not boundless. As a created being, I'm not the creator. And so to me, to care for myself is to acknowledge the contours of limitation. And to say, if I ignore those, or if I try to extend those, something gets lost. It might be a sense of self, it might be health, it might be relationships, it could be a whole host of things. A failure to accept our limits is actually idolatrous because we're trying to be something we're not, and often we're trying to be God. So to care for ourselves is to accept our humanness and the beauty that Christ meets us in it, and often does more than we dare dream.
There was that season, that was right around the time I was diagnosed, where I just felt like I couldn't find myself, right? Like I was just this person who was depressed all the time and was just sad all the time. This is my identity, right, in this way, or this is my experience, and I can't see past it. I know intellectually that there's more to me, but I don't feel like there is. And so, I wrote this little note card. I wrote down statements about myself that I thought were true. Like, I am a daughter, I am a friend, I am a sister, I am loved, because I would forget. And so I would open it and look at it and be like, this is who I am. What I would want churches to know as someone who lives with a mental health challenge is, one, know more about it, and two, talk about it. I think when you hear about something over and over again, it doesn't feel so scary. It doesn't feel like something you have to be delivered from, but something that we can all live these healthy, faithful lives with. I wish that churches would tell people that your faith changes. That's part of the spiritual journey. And it will be okay. And God is here. And I think a really good church community would say, and we are here too. So that when your faith doesn't carry you, we'll carry you. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise God, my help and my God.